It's a celebration of America's freedom. Welcome to the Marc Scaringi Show. The Marc Scaringi Show is your place for a weekly discussion on making America great again. The important political and legal issues of the day, a celebration of the Constitution, and traditional American values. Marc is a practicing attorney, a former senatorial candidate, a Donald J. Trump-endorsed delegate, and a defender of the Constitution. His goal? To put America first. And now, celebrating America's freedoms, here's attorney Marc Scaringi.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Marc Scaringi Show. This is your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. This is where we discuss the important legal and political issues of the day from the perspective of putting America first. You can access prior podcasts of this show. You can read my columns on Penn Live and the Harrisburg Patriot News and take a look at some great merchandise by getting on the marcscaringishow.com website. And during the show, you can call in at 717-540-0580. That's 717-540-0580. And you can state your question or state your comment live to our radio audience listeners and to our listeners on Harrisburg 100 Facebook Live. You all can comment, and we'll read your comments on the air, and we'll keep the discussion flowing. On Thursday, the liberal political website BuzzFeed published a blockbuster report that President Trump directed his former lawyer, Michael Cohen, to lie to Congress about the proposal for a Trump Tower in Moscow. Now, that turns out to be fake news. BuzzFeed stated that Cohen told the Office of Special Counsel, Robert Mueller, that President Trump personally instructed Cohen to lie to Congress about the timing of the Moscow Trump Tower project in order to create an obscurity or in order to camouflage Trump's involvement and the timing of the project. Now, no other news organization was able to confirm the report in the article published by BuzzFeed nearly 24 hours after its publication. But that didn't stop the mainstream media from running away with this story. The media spent all of yesterday covering the story as if it were true, and as if the president would soon be impeached for the crime of subornation of perjury. Now, that's the criminal offense of procuring another to commit perjury, which is a crime. It's the crime of lying in a material matter while under oath. And that would qualify when you are testifying before Congress and you're under oath and you make a material false statement. So the media used the caveat in its reporting about the BuzzFeed story. They kept saying, if it is true, and then they would launch into their breathless coverage about how Trump instructed Cohen to lie to Congress and how that's an impeachable offense. Now, by news coverage, I mean, here's what the media do. They simply repeat the story in the BuzzFeed article, and they repeat it as if it is true, when in fact, in this case, it was false. But they repeat it as if it was true, and then they do those roundtables, and they ask their other liberal colleagues who are also in the media what they think of the BuzzFeed story. And so it becomes this circular repetition of a fake story as if it were true. So, for example, NBC and CNBC, they report the BuzzFeed story as if it's news, as if it's factual, as if it happened. They report it without corroborating any of it. And so now this is a news story. Trump instructed Cohen to lie to Congress. That's an impeachable offense. So they're reporting the news. And then they turn to their political director, Chuck Todd, to comment on it. Now, Chuck Todd is supposed to be an unbiased journalist, right? Someone who reports the political news. Now, of course, he isn't unbiased by any stretch of the definition. He's a liberal, former Democratic political operative who, by the way, is married to a woman who runs a political campaign company that provides direct mail and consulting services for Democratic candidates and for progressive causes, and she serves as a spokesperson for Democratic candidates. So this is the Chuck Todd who's supposed to be an unbiased journalist who reports the news. Now, in any event, when the liberal newscasters at CNBC or NBC they report the fake story, they ask Chuck Todd to comment on it, and his first response is, "You can't overstate how significant this development is." Chuck Todd then interviews Lanny Davis. Lanny Davis is a liberal Democrat, a former political operative for the Clintons, who now is, by the way, representing Michael Cohen. And Lanny Davis says Michael Cohen will neither confirm nor deny the truth of the BuzzFeed story. Chuck Todd states in response, well, that means it's a confirmation. So the viewer of this news is left to think that Michael Cohen's lawyer has confirmed the allegations in the BuzzFeed story that Trump directed him to lie to Congress. And that's how this fake liberal news media, they keep this fake story going. Lanny Davis's refusal to confirm or deny is just a refusal to be truthful. And it's being coy, and it's giving this fake story legs, which is a term of art in the media. When you want to keep a story going, you give it legs. Cohen knows whether or not he was told by Trump to lie to Congress. However, if he told the truth through his attorney that Trump did not tell him to lie, then there would be no legs to the story. There would be no legs to the let's get Trump story. There would be no legs to the let's impeach Trump fake news story. So Michael Cohen and his lawyer, a Democratic operative, in response to a question posed by a former Democratic operative who's supposed to be an unbiased news reporter, they concoct this statement, and they say that we can neither confirm nor deny. Now, that sounds ominous, doesn't it? Now, there's no reason why Michael Cohen is not able to confirm or deny a fake news story. Lanny Davis mumbled something about Cohen respecting his agreement with the Office of Special Counsel. But a few hours later, the Office of Special Counsel put out a statement denying the allegations. Now, the media jumped all over itself, reporting on the BuzzFeed story and informing their listeners that they now need to move on to impeach the president. I watched countless cycles of news where the purportedly unbiased, neutral journalists talked about subordination of perjury, getting someone else to lie under oath, and how that's an impeachable offense. And by the way, lying under oath, perjury, was the first article of impeachment in the case involving former President Bill Clinton, and how that would have been one of the first articles of impeachment against former President Richard Nixon had impeachment articles been brought. So this is what the news media was instructing us yesterday. They're setting up the president to be impeached based upon a false news story. Remarkable, isn't it? CNN and MSNBC collectively used the word impeach nearly 200 times on Friday. 200 times they used the word impeach. Now, that was before the special counsel's office disputed this fake news story, denied it. MSNBC's Katie Tur, for example, she stated at the top of her show that Donald Trump is facing the most damning report to date for his presidency, a story that could lead to his impeachment. That entire statement was false. We'll talk more about this fake news story about President Trump directing his former personal lawyer, Michael Cohen, to lie to Congress. When we return from this brief commercial break, you're listening to The Marc Scaringi Show. Stay tuned.
Now, more of Marc Scaringi on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to The Marc Scaringi Show. This is your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. We talk about the important political and legal issues of the day from the perspective of putting America first. And it appears BuzzFeed, the liberal news organization, has not put America first in the publishing of an article late Thursday in which they claim that law enforcement officials in the Office of Special Counsel have indicated that they have evidence through emails, text messages, and other documentary evidence that Michael Cohen was instructed by President Trump to lie to Congress about the Moscow Trump Tower project. BuzzFeed ran the story. It was repeated ad infinitum on every major news channel over the past day and a half. CNN and MSNBC combined repeated the word impeachment 200 times because they're using this fake news story as grounds to get the country behind Democratic efforts in the Congress to impeach the president. Of course, it all turns out to be fake. We're taking some calls. You can call in 717-540-0580, 717-540-0580. You can also comment on Harrisburg 100 Facebook Live. We got a comment from Ella Woods who says, "What idiots to keep this going." I believe that Robert Mueller straightened that out already, which he did, and we're going to get that. We're going to get to that in a minute. But we're talking right now about the media's response. Now, the media led by CNN, of course, they then, after repeating the word impeachment 200 times, they then turned to Republican senators. And they attempted to interview many Republican senators, asking them if they thought this was an impeachable offense. So now we're moving on to the fake news story, not corroborated, but it's reported, and how it's an impeachable offense. And now they're interviewing Republican senators, asking them to go on the record as to whether or not they'll support the impeachment of President Trump on grounds that don't exist, which they don't report that part of it. And CNN reported... They reported that Republicans stay mum on the bombshell BuzzFeed reporting. That's the title of an article on CNN's website. As if the Republican senators have something to hide, that they're reluctant to come out and support the impeachment of the president based upon the BuzzFeed article. That's what CNN wants you to believe. Now, perhaps the Republican senators stayed mum on the report because the report was fake. And they didn't want to call out Trump for impeachment based upon a false report. Democrats, on the other hand, were ready to impeach Representative Dave Sickeline of Rhode Island. He sits on the House Democratic leadership team in the House Judiciary Committee. He tweeted, if the president directed Cohen to lie to Congress, that is obstruction of justice, period, full stop. And we have another tweet from a prominent Democrat in Congress. We know that the president has engaged in a long pattern of obstruction. Really, do we? Directing a subordinate to lie to Congress is a federal crime. The House Judiciary Committee's job is to get to the bottom of it, and we will do that work. That was New York Democratic Representative Jerry Nadler, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, whose panel would lead potential impeachment proceedings. That was his tweet on Friday. So rest assured, the Democratic leadership in Congress is poised. They are ready to bring impeachment articles based upon a false news story in BuzzFeed. That's what we've gathered over the past day and a half of reporting. Let's open up the phone lines, and we'll take some calls from our listeners. We have Al from Harrisburg. You're on the Marc Scaringi Show.
Hello, Mark. I appreciate your comments. I was wondering if you can answer me. Is lawyer-client privilege, is that something that is in the law, or is it just a custom? I ask that because, I'm concerned that the government rushed in and confiscated Cohen's properties, his office and his home, and isn't that a violation of lawyer-client privilege?
Yeah, well, Al, the lawyer-client privilege is about communications made between an attorney and his client, and the attorney-client privilege goes both ways, communications that the client makes to the attorney and that the attorney makes to the client. So I'm not sure that in this case, yes, you have the allegation that Michael Cohen has told law enforcement officers that he was instructed by the president to lie to Congress. Now, attorney-client privilege doesn't cover using your lawyer to commit a crime. So in that case, it probably wouldn't apply. But that's a very good question. I thank you, Al, from Harrisburg, for the question.
Well, yeah. What bothers me is this whole thing. They're basing a lot of testimony. Cohen has been saying things, his discussions with the president, and to me, that's a violation of the lawyer-client privilege. Just like husbands and wives aren't supposed to be able; they don't have to testify against each other.
Yeah, well, you raised some very good points, and I appreciate that. Al from Harrisburg, thank you. I got to get some other calls here. We have Jim from New Holland. You're on the Marc Scaringi show. Did Trump instruct Michael Cohen to lie to Congress?
Hey, Mark, it's always good to talk to you, buddy. I'll tell you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Jim from New Holland. Go ahead.
Yeah, the thing that disappoints me with this whole thing is I want to make a comment about this fake news. This news media we have today, and that includes our local, I just refuse to buy newspapers. They put all these lies out, and so many people believe lies, and I cannot believe half the American people believe the lies this news media puts out. And so they're causing so many problems in this country. They're as much as fault as the Democratic Party. Well, of course they are. The news media is the Socialist Democratic Party. Let's face it. That's how I think.
Yeah, well, let me just comment on that, and I think you're right. It's and many people have stopped reading the newspapers. Well, many newspapers have stopped printing because of changes in the marketplace. But now they're all online, and you're right. And when I prepare for this show, I can spend every radio show talking about the fake news, and I almost feel like I'm doing a disservice somehow, or I'm kind of, I guess, like wasting my time or spinning my wheels, because it would be never ending. I mean, there's no end to the fake news. And, our friends who write these articles for these news sites, they are supposed to be journalists. And I guess journalism is supposed to be a profession. They talk about it as being a profession. But let me tell you, as a lawyer, if we submit a pleading or a brief or a paper in court, and we make a material false statement in that court submission, we are in real trouble. We are in serious trouble by the court and by the disciplinary board that governs lawyers in Pennsylvania and across the state. I mean, there are serious sanctions for making material false statements that lawyers can get into. And we're professionals, I think, for the most part. Most of us are. But journalists, they make them all the time. They make them all in every single article on from the BuzzFeed story, from CNN and MSNBC. It's just riddled with false news. And is there any repercussion to these journalists?
Right.
So, Jim, I thank you for calling. Appreciate that call. And when President Trump gets frustrated, he talks about we need to modify our defamation laws to make it a little bit easier for someone, a citizen, who is on the wrong end of a defamatory news story, to seek redress through our court system. And it's pretty difficult for a private citizen, certainly one who has achieved some sort of public stature. It's hard to bring a defamation claim. But that seems to be really the only recourse that a citizen has when he is at the center of false news stories. Now, the BuzzFeed news story, which was not corroborated, alleges the president committed a crime. Now, what recourse does President Trump have to respond to that? Now, the alleged journalist, or the purported journalist who wrote the story without any corroborating evidence, without any ability to corroborate the evidence, what happens to him? Is he going to be sanctioned by some sort of disciplinary board of journalism? No. He just goes on to continue, and he's online right now defending his story. So, but the story, look what the story created, a firestorm in the media to impeach President Trump over something that didn't happen. I mean, it is remarkable, and you can see how frustrated the president is, and you can see why he refers to fake news, and you can see why he talks about the media being the enemy of the people. And that's a very strong phrase to use, enemy of the people. But my goodness, these media companies, BuzzFeed, CNN, MSNBC, I mean, they are using false news to try to convince the American people to impeach a sitting president. This is the president who the American people put into office. So one could construe these members of the media to be the enemy, and I use that term softly. I don't mean literally, but going against the will of the people in a way that really harms and injures our republic. The American people voted for President Trump. They put him into office. It was done fairly, and now there is just so much effort being spent by Democrats in Congress and the 99% of the media out there to undo that election, to go against the will of the electorate and try to remove this man from office based upon trumped-up charges. No pun intended. You're listening to the Marc Scaringi Show. We're going to take a quick commercial break. Stay tuned. We'll be back right after this.
Let's get back to the Marc Scaringi Show on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to the Marc Scaringi Show. This is your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. This is where we talk about the important political and legal issues of the day. And we have yet another one, an important issue that combines the law and politics, and that is the BuzzFeed News article in which BuzzFeed is reporting that there is that the Office of Special Counsel Robert Mueller has evidence and texts and emails and documentary evidence that Michael Cohen was directed by the President of the United States to lie to Congress. That would be a crime by the President, subornation of perjury, which is procuring another to make a material false statement under oath. That has set the media in a firestorm. The CNN and MSNBC combined over just a couple of hours uttered the word impeachment about 200 times. They brought on Democratic House members to give their perspective on bringing impeachment proceedings against the president for lying to or for suborning perjury. They're interviewing Republican senators saying, basically, why aren't you on board supporting impeachment? Basically, Republican senators accusing Republican senators of hiding from the issue. Well, it turns out the whole issue is fake. The allegation is not true. The Trump administration has responded pretty forcefully. Trump's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, stated any suggestion from any source that the president counseled Michael Cohen to lie is categorically false. He said, if you believe Cohen, I can get you a great deal on the Brooklyn Bridge. In addition, White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders called the allegation absolutely ridiculous. President Trump himself tweeted, don't forget Michael Cohen has already been convicted of perjury and fraud, and as recently as this week, the Wall Street Journal has suggested that he may have stolen tens of thousands of dollars, lying to reduce his jail time. Watch father-in-law. So President Trump is giving us a heads up on something that might be happening with regard to Michael Cohen's father-in-law. Who knows? But the Office of Special Counsel, and I think this is an unprecedented act by the Office of Special Counsel to comment on evidence. It has rarely, I think maybe once or twice before, commented on the investigation in very general ways, but it's never commented before on evidence. Now, Peter Carr, the spokesperson for Robert Mueller's office, the Office of Special Counsel, released this very rare statement Friday disputing the BuzzFeed report. I guess this is the second of its kind since the investigation into this so-called collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia began. The statement by the special counsel reads, BuzzFeed's description of specific statements to the special counsel's office and characterization of documents and testimony obtained by this office regarding Michael Cohen's congressional testimony are not accurate. Now, my first reaction was to think, wow, Robert Mueller is a stand-up guy. I was surprised that he would do the right thing and set the record straight. And I assumed that he saw the damage that was being caused to the presidency, to our Republican form of government by this fake news story and how it was being used to justify calls for impeachment of the president. But then it occurred to me that Robert Mueller probably released the statement to defend his own reputation, the reputation of his own prosecutors and investigators, because the BuzzFeed story was based upon alleged leaks from the Office of Special Counsel, and that, of course, damages Mueller's reputation. So Mueller probably put out the denial to protect his reputation, not the president's. If Robert Mueller's special counsel cared about the reputation of the president, he would have announced a long time ago that he's found no evidence that President Trump was involved in the commission of any crime related to conspiring with the Russian government to interfere in the U.S. presidential election. Well, let's open up the phone lines again, and we'll take some calls. We have Dean from Boiling Springs. You're on the Marc Scaringi Show.
Yes, Mark. I was very disappointed with your response to the gentleman from New Holland about attorney-client privilege. I would think that in law school, in your ethics programs or your ethics classes, that there would be something in there that would talk about the sanctity of that, or the sanity of that. And you really didn't answer his question. Where does attorney-client privilege fall? And if the president would have instructed him to do something illegal, isn't it his duty to tell the president that it's illegal?
Well, yes. If your client is asking you to take an action that is illegal, you certainly have a duty to inform the client of that, and an attorney cannot take any action that is illegal. So that's not really about attorney-client privilege, though.
No.
Attorney-client privilege protects communications between the client and his attorney. So if a client makes a communication to his attorney, that is a privileged communication, and the attorney is bound by that privilege unless the privilege is waived or there are some exceptions. There's something called the crime fraud exception. I just don't want to get into all of the details of the attorney-client privilege, but it can't be used to protect the fraud or a crime. So that's my answer to that issue.
When is the attorney complicit? When is the attorney all of a sudden, he's making these statements? If those things actually occurred and he followed through with them, when is he brought to justice?
Well, with regard to Michael Cohen, the only part of the Michael Cohen criminal case that would implicate communications between Michael Cohen as the lawyer and Donald Trump as the client would pertain to the campaign finance violation charges. The rest of the charges have no relationship to President Trump at all. The taxi cab company, the bank fraud, the tax fraud. But with regard to the campaign finance violations, what Michael Cohen pled guilty to were, in my opinion, actually not violations of the Federal Election and Campaign Act. And I talk about that in a column that I wrote, and it's on my website. You can take a look at that, where I go through the actual federal statute, and I talk about how making payments or entering into agreements with third parties for the purpose of making sure those parties don't disclose information or actions that may or may not have occurred that had nothing to do with a federal election. I'm talking about the non-disclosure agreements with Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal, on how those have nothing to do with a federal election. And so they were not campaign violations to begin with. And I explain how Michael Cohen pled to them, nevertheless, in my view, I think, because he thought he would get, by cooperating with the Southern District of New York Attorney's Office, a more lenient sentence when it came to sentencing on the actual crimes that he committed: tax fraud, bank fraud, etc. So, go ahead.
No, back to my original reason for the call. Attorney-client privilege. First of all, what is communication? And obviously, attorney-client privilege was circumvented. That Cohen obviously said things under oath that should have fallen under attorney-client privilege. So what is the punishment that he is going to? Is he going to lose his license? Is something going to occur that we should know about?
Yeah, well, I would assume his license has already been suspended or will be suspended, or maybe even revoked as a result of his guilty plea to the crimes that he pled to.
Okay, but now if his license has been suspended because of the crimes he's already pled to, why does that lessen the impact of attorney-client privilege? Why does that all of a sudden make the president bare-skinned and open to all kinds of investigations and accusations based on what Cohen is telling him or telling investigators about their professional relationship?
Yeah, and as I said, and I got to move on to some other calls quickly and then a commercial break because there's basically a crime fraud exception to the privilege, and that's probably the direction that the Office of Special Counsel have gone with their witness, Michael Cohen.
Okay, well, just quickly, since you need to go, what gives the federal government the authority or the right to go into Cohen's offices and residences and taking records that were his records based on communications with the president?
Yeah, great.
Even before it really got fully involved, all of a sudden they're there picking up stuff, and now they're going to make the charges.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it's of course the prosecutor, the investigator, the police officer has to have probable cause that a crime was committed, and that evidence of that crime are located in the area subject to a warrant, and so they had search warrants to go into Michael Cohen's office and into his hotel room and into his home, and
but
that's.
Can they be so broad that they include everything that is a communication between Cohen and the president?
No, I think, and I've got to break for a commercial, but I think there was an agreement. I think Trump's attorneys were able to work out an agreement with the prosecutors to keep a certain amount of those communications that were attorney-client privileged away from the special counsel. But I've got to take a brief commercial break. You're listening to the Marc Scaringi Show. Stay tuned. We'll be back right after this.
Thank you.
Now back to the Marc Scaringi Show on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to the Marc Scaringi Show. This is your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. This is where we talk about the important political and legal issues of the day. We're talking about the BuzzFeed News story, which implicates President Trump in directing Michael Cohen, his then personal attorney, to lie to Congress about the Trump Tower in Moscow project, and how the media ran with that story and promoted talk about impeaching the president for suborning perjury, which is a federal crime and has been used in the past in the case of former President Bill Clinton as an article of impeachment. And we've also gotten into some real technical analysis of the criminal case against Michael Cohen and its interface with the attorney-client privilege. In that case, we talked about how there is a crime fraud exception to the attorney-client privilege, so it does not apply in cases in which the client knew that he was using the services of his attorney to commit a crime. And so if we can narrow into the two campaign finance violations that Michael Cohen pled guilty to and will be sentenced on, I think in March, those involve communications between Cohen and the president with regard to the handling of two payments in exchange for non-disclosure agreements, payments to Stormy Daniels and a payment to Stormy Daniels and a payment to Karen McDougal. I've explained on the radio show and in columns how I don't think those are campaign finance violations. They were not done for the primary purpose of influencing an election, which is what the prosecutor has to prove at trial. I think the primary purpose for those non-disclosure agreements was to obtain the non-disclosure agreement, was to obtain the agreement by McDougal and Daniels not to disclose anything about the purported alleged affairs that occurred years ago. That was the primary purpose of those agreements. They had nothing to do with electioneering or campaigning. And so that's the rationale that I've given. And you can take a look at my articles on Penn Live, and they're on the markscaringshow.com website. But those would be the communications between the client and his attorney that the prosecutors are saying really were for the purpose of committing a crime, a felony violating campaign finance law. And so the prosecutors would argue the attorney-client privilege doesn't apply in that particular case. There's an exception, the crime fraud exception. All right. So hopefully I have responded to the two callers who asked a very technical question about the attorney-client privilege. But we're also talking about the larger issue, and that is, did President Trump commit a crime by directing his former attorney, Michael Cohen, to lie to Congress, and how the media has run with that story. And now it turns out that it's not true. It's fake. The Office of Special Counsel released a statement denying these allegations. So we'll open the phone lines and we'll take some calls. Harry from Halifax, you're on the Marc Scaringi Show.
Hello.
Yes, Harry, go ahead.
Well, I'm wondering about this line to Congress. What's the difference between that and lying to the general public? As far as I'm concerned, there is no difference. If somebody is chasing in the legal system, a fact is to be a lie, that there should be at least a minimum sentence of 10 years with possibly more, depending on the severity. I mean, that's what the Democrats, well, it isn't the fact that you're guilty of this crime, but it's the amount of the severity that we're accusing you of, and it's all a damn lie, and that's what they've been lying through their teeth for years, and especially since this here last presidential election.
Well, Harry, I think you're right, but I will say the difference between lying to the public and lying to Congress in this case was that when Michael Cohen was testifying to Congress, he was under oath and he was testifying before a tribunal, and so that's going to implicate the laws against perjury, because when we have people who testify before a tribunal and they're under oath, we want them to testify honestly. And so that's the criminal repercussion to lying under oath. Now, I will quibble with whether or not Cohen committed perjury when he testified to Congress about when the negotiations, these very preliminary negotiations between the Trump organization and someone in Moscow about building a building there, when they started and when they ended. And apparently Cohen didn't get the date quite right. He moved it back in time, a couple of months before the negotiations actually ended. But you don't really know when negotiations actually end. I mean, there's no letter that is sent that says, we hereby declare negotiations for building a building are hereby over, cease and desist. That doesn't happen in the real world. So it just seems to me that really is a stretch. That Cohen lied to Congress about that, and firstly, and secondly, I'm not sure that it was even material. I mean, how is it material to whatever the heck Congress was investigating? Congress is purportedly investigating collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russian government or agents of the Russian government to interfere in the 2016 presidential election. That's the purpose of the investigation. Michael Cohen getting the dates wrong on when the Trump organization, which builds buildings all over the world, no longer was communicating with some unnamed people in Russia about building a building there. How is that material to the congressional investigation is beyond me. So I don't even think it qualifies in two ways. But nevertheless, he pled to it, and he's going to go to jail for it. And as I've said before, I think it's because he actually committed crimes, bank fraud, tax fraud, etc. And so he was looking for a more lenient sentence. But Harry, Harry from Halifax. I like that, Harry from Halifax.
Just a second.
Yes.
Suppose you're bearing false witness against somebody if you're presenting a legal event that turns out to be a crime. That's false witness. It don't matter whether you're in court or you're not. If somebody puts something in the newspaper about me that's not true, I should have recourse of getting even with that so-and-so.
Okay, well, let me just respond to that. And bearing false witness, it might be a sin in biblical terms, but if it's outside of court, under current law, really the only redress is a civil defamation action if the statement satisfies the elements for defamation. And if you have the wherewithal to hire attorneys and to bring a lawsuit and go through years and years of endless litigation on the issue, and that's what Trump is complaining about. He's saying there really is there's no real quick and effective recourse to someone who was lied about in public. And we have a First Amendment, we have freedom of speech, and people do have a constitutional right to speak freely. That's in the Constitution. But then again, we've always had defamation laws that give someone who has been defamed the recourse through our court system to sue for damages. In our country, we have flirted from time to time with enacting laws that provided criminal sanctions to individuals, publishers, and others who have made false or defamatory statements. And you can go all the way back to the Alien and Sedition Acts, where that became a criminal offense, and our government actually put publishers of newspapers in jail for publishing stories that the powers that be didn't agree with. I don't think that's what we should have in our country today. I think that was a pretty bad experience that our country went through, and I don't think we want to go there again. But Harry from Halifax, I thank you for your call. You hit on the problem, and that is there's no real good recourse for President Trump to respond in a way to stop BuzzFeed or CNN from spreading fake news. He just has to kind of grin and bear it. But his recourse is the power of Twitter and this president's ability to communicate directly with the American people through Twitter. He just circumvents the media and goes right to the American people, and it's an amazing communication device, and he's been successful with it to date. The man has yet to be impeached, despite so much effort by our friends in the left and the media and the Democratic Party, which are all really together in this effort to take down this president. So that's where we are today. Now, I know the president has tweeted out a comment that I think at 3 o'clock today, so in 1 hour, he will make a major announcement concerning the shutdown of the government and the border crisis. So we are all waiting breathlessly for that announcement, and that will, of course, basically control the news cycle for probably 24 hours or 48 hours, maybe not that long, afterwards. So we'll wait and see what the president has to say. The whole country is waiting with bated breath to see whether or not the president's going to announce the end of the government shutdown. Maybe he'll declare a national emergency and start building that wall right now and reopen the government. We'll see at 3 o'clock today. That's about all the time we have today for the Marc Scaringi Show. I want to thank you for listening. Tune in every Saturday at 1 o'clock for the important political and legal issues of the day from the perspective of putting America first. Thank you. Have a good weekend.